Hi, Sarah, and hi, everybody. Welcome to the APA workshop. My name is Jim Moore. I'm going to be the presenter, and I work for the National Center of Academic and Dissertation Excellence through the Chicago School, which is known as NCAID. And really what this presentation is going to serve as is a high-level overview on a basic understanding of APA style and how it's used in writing. So why APA? Why is this format so popular? Well, it's been established by social and behavioral scientists over time, and really what its intent is to provide scientific writing to a broader academic audience and really have more of a specific format that focuses on discussing literature and published studies and really focusing on explaining that information. And one of the benefits of having a specific format that's broad for an academic audience is giving the opportunity for individuals to focus more on discussing literature and studies in a scientific way as opposed to interjecting any types of bias, and really provides the writers with an opportunity to write in an objective manner when discussing information, and really that kind of standardizes the format throughout. And as you can see here, a lot of the different types of writing materials that use APA format, things from term papers, research reports, empirical studies, literature reviews, theoretical and methodological articles, and case studies. So whether you're a researcher in the field or if you're a student writing a paper on published studies, APA format is going to be applicable in all those areas. And one of the things we're going to do in this workshop today is I'm going to make it a little bit interactive in the sense that I'm going to go back and forth between this presentation and also a student example paper that I'll walk through and kind of show some common areas of formatting and things. And really, in terms of just a basic paper, and as you move through coursework in psychology, you'll kind of work on higher level projects and things that will be more detailed in terms of scholarly writing and include more thorough information. But really, kind of the basic areas that I recommend focusing on with writing papers include some of these tenets. First one being a title page, and I'm going to kind of walk through this in a minute too. Headings, specific font style, and when you're using APA, always make sure that you're double spacing using 12-point Times New Roman fonts. And if you're indenting paragraphs, make sure that they're a ½ inch indented. 1-inch margin should be used throughout the document. And when I go through this document, I'll kind of show you basically where all the formatting is at so you can kind of see where everything is. And also, citing information. There's specific in-text and parenthetical citations that are used when discussing literature that you incorporate into papers that use APA style. And lastly, a references section. So here's kind of a student example paper, and I want to just kind of walk through some basic things here real quick to reiterate what I was talking about on the last slide. As you can see, papers in APA format typically have a title page, and this is kind of what the title page basically looks like. You can see there's a running head in the top left corner, and it specifically has running head, and you want to make sure this H in head is lowercase, and then this title here, this heading, should be all in capital letters, and it should basically be an abbreviation of the first initial parts of the title. And as you can see here, you have managing a leadership transition, which kind of is the first initial part of the title here. And really, this area shouldn't be more than 50 characters long. So this is a nice kind of abbreviation for the heading here. You also have the page numbers. And if you want to go into this, you just want to click here, and you can see the headings. And another area you want to do too is click different first page. And the reason for that is because I'm going to show you here on all subsequent pages, you remove the word running head from the heading, and you just have the rest of the basic heading, which is managing the leadership transition in this case. You can see it's still all capital letters, and then you have subsequent pages following. And then in terms of formatting, you can see Times New Roman 12-point font here, and also paragraph style. Line spacing is set at double. You can see when indenting paragraphs that it's set at 0.5 inches. And then lastly, I'm just going to show real quick where margins are so that you have that information as well. As you can see here, 1-inch margins throughout, as I noted on the slide. And just to kind of repeat what I was talking about, here's just a screenshot of that title page I was showing. And I emphasize here, I'm very much personally very specific in looking at these things as an instructor and point them out to students. You know, make sure you have the correct format for running head. APA 6th edition format is very specific with this, and try to make sure that you follow it accordingly. And also, too, there's a link for the APA style, and this actually does a good job, and you can find a lot of different resources through the APA. It's http://www.apastyle.org. This specific link here will show you how to format a title page and how to keep the formatting different from the title page compared to the rest of the pages in the document that you're writing. But just so you know, if you just go to this link here, apastyle.org, it has a lot of great resources for APA formatting in general. So if you have any questions, there's a search tool. And there's also a presentation on the APA website as well that really kind of does a great job of explaining APA style and APA formatting. Another popular aspect, and I kind of mentioned this too in that example I was showing, are headings. And there's 5 specific levels of headings. For the most part, in terms of basic writing papers and APA formatting, I find typically the most common headings are these levels 1 and 2. Sometimes you might use level 3 headings as subheadings. 4 and 5 are pretty uncommon in terms of general paper writing, but this information is here. I just provided a screenshot of it, and I'm going to show you some of these examples as well with main headings and also subheadings so you kind of get an idea. You can see main level headings are centered, bold-faced, and uppercase and lowercase lettering. Really what they kind of look like. I'm going to just go back to my document here. You can see this is a main level heading. You can see it's centered in bold and has upper and lowercase headings. And secondary headings, and I'm just going to go back to the presentation to kind of explain this. The words flush left, boldface, and also too, just so you know, this is in the 6th edition APA manual. This is where this was taken from. There's a specific section donated to headings, and it has all of this information. And I'm also going to later on in the presentation provide you with some other resources in addition to APA that you can use to kind of really get some good information on APA formatting and be really good resources for you to use. But secondary headings, you can see it's called flush left, boldface, uppercase, and lowercase lettering. And what flush left means is it's just a line to the left-hand side of the page. So secondary level headings, those would be any headings that come after a main heading. Usually they happen in the body of the paper after an introduction and kind of break up the paper into main topic areas in the body and kind of explain different sections. You can see here that they're flush left. Now, if you had any subheadings within these secondary level headings, which would be those third headings I was talking about, those are upper and lowercase lettering, but they just have uppercase on the very first part here, and they're also indented, and it would look something like this. It would be participants and methodology, and you also include a period there. So that's kind of the difference. So if you had, for any of these secondary level headings, subheadings within those headings, they would look like this. Whereas you can see secondary headings are different in that they use upper and lowercase throughout the main words. Like here, for example, design materials, and there's no period, and they're aligned flush left. So that's kind of the difference, is just so you can kind of see what those look like. And here's just a screenshot again of what I was just showing you, examples of different types of headings. Here's a level 1 type heading that usually is at the beginning of a paper, and then a second level heading, which I mentioned, usually highlights main topic points or items within the body of a paper. You'll find this especially too if you write literature review papers and have to create outlines for those papers and think about organizing the information in terms of main topic items. Secondary level headings in papers are a great way to organize that information. So now we're going to take a breather and go into a really important part of APA formatting, and that's in-text citations. And before I delve too much into different examples and things, I just want to give a quick explanation of citations and their importance with APA formatting. In-text citations are really valuable in the sense that they're necessary when discussing published works or studies or articles of published authors. You want to make sure you're giving those authors credit by citing their work, and make sure that when you're discussing information that you paraphrase it from the literature you're using. What that means is you're putting it in your own words. And then while you're putting it in your own words, because it's the work of somebody else and their ideas, you still want to make sure you're giving them credit by using citations. So that's my little segue into in-text citations. And here's, you know what, there's actually a question, and I'm going to just read it out and go through it. And the question asks, is it best to text in-text citations at the beginning of where information from one source begins or at the end? And really, this is kind of what I'm going to talk about. That's a great question. And really, it sometimes depends on the flow of the writing and the preference of the writer. You have the option to either use in-text citations within a sentence or at the end of a sentence, depending on how the flow and style of writing is going. If you want to kind of highlight what a researcher found, it's good to kind of cite that information within the text. Or if you kind of want to explain to the reader and maybe make an argument based on some findings, then you can use citations at the end of the text. And here's kind of an example I'm showing, and this is in the APA manual on page 174. And I just want to kind of go through some differences here. This is just a one-author work, and you can see here's an example of an in-text citation within the sentence where you spell out the author's last name and then the year of the publication. And you can kind of use this in terms of flow, like among, you know, in this example it's saying among different samples, the author Kessler found this, and you can kind of see how that works. If you're using that author within the sentence in the same paragraph, you don't have to include the year each time. You can see here Kessler 2003 and then Kessler again also found. You can forego including the year here. However, if it's a different paragraph, then you have to include the year again each time. Same thing with citations at the end of the sentence. You want to make sure you include the author's last names and year at the end. Parentheses you can see here, and also the period then follows after the citation. And again, kind of talking about, you know, that good question that was asked in the flow of the writing. In this example, kind of talking about what the implications of the study are. You know, you don't want to, maybe you want to get away a little bit from being too redundant in terms of writing style and not keep saying Kessler this, Kessler that throughout. You can kind of see here talking about the implications. The studies show that there was a high rate of comorbidity with alcohol abuse or dependence and major depression, and then the citation at the end of the sentence. And this just kind of reiterates in terms of citing in text and when to cite in text. And really it should be generally, if you're not citing within the sentence, if you're taking an idea, make sure you're citing immediately after anything that's requiring a citation. And this example here kind of gives what you would do in terms of using direct quotes. If you're using verbiage that's exact word for word of the author, you want to make sure you directly quote that information. Don't consider it your own idea or work. That's considered plagiarism. You want to make sure you give that author specific credit for their exact wording if you're using direct quotes. And you can see here what you would do is you would just include a quotation mark at the beginning and then a quotation mark at the end of the quote. And the citation is a little bit different in the sense that it would include, for example, say you were using this Kessler author, it would also include the page number as well. So it would be Kessler 2003, page 1, or page 17, for example. And that's kind of the difference. You just want to make sure you add the page number to direct quotes as well. In terms of guidance and writing style, typically when using the work of other authors, you want to try to paraphrase information and put the words into your own words rather than directly quoting. Directly quoting kind of loses the idea of the arguments you're trying to make and also kind of objectively describing the style of information. Quotes should only be used sparingly in the writing. My recommendation is to use maybe one direct quote per 3 pages of text. I think it's a good guideline. You don't want to be using direct quotes constantly throughout your writing because it really kind of loses the strength of the style. And this is also in the APA manual on page 177. And this just kind of shows in terms of when using in-text citations and parenthetical citations, either within the sentence or at the ends of sentences, how you cite that information based on the number of authors. And it gets a little bit different with the more authors you have. You can see here you have the author last name and year, but then you also, if you have more than one author and you're using a within text citation, you also want to include the word and you spell it out when using it within the text. If it's after the sentence, you use this ampersand here. So that's a kind of a fundamental difference between the two. And make sure you're kind of aware of that when using that, the citations, whether it's within text or parenthetically at the end of sentences. And you can see here, it just shows the different authors based on kind of the number and totals and what they look like. And if there's 3 authors or more than 2 authors, after the initial citation, you can start using this et al. To abbreviate the other authors. You don't have to, after that first citation, keep saying every single author. You can just use et al. And that's the same with parenthetical as well. And if there's 6 or more authors, you don't even have to cite those in the beginning. You could just use et al. From start to finish. And what et al. Means in kind of its origin, it basically means and others, referring to all of the other authors in the study. And as you can see here, 3, 4, and 5 authors, and how you list those, I just kind of demonstrated on that past chart. And after the initial citation, you can use et al. Period for each subsequent citation. And 6 or more authors, you could just abbreviate immediately. Make sure in terms of style that you pay specific attention to how et al. Is formatted. It could be very easy to fall into a trap of not formatting it correctly because of how it's set as an abbreviation. You want to make sure, here's an example of a parenthetical citation. You would have the first author's name and then follow that by et al. Only a period after the word al. After et, there's nothing, no comma, no period. All that comes after al. So you have al period, comma, and then the year. In terms of block quoting, this occurs for any direct quotes, and I kind of mentioned direct quotes earlier. and they use them sparingly. If you have a really long direct quote, which is considered by APA standards of anything 40 words or longer, you want to make sure that you use specific block quote formatting. And it differs from traditional direct quotes in that you don't put quotes around the words that are quoted. You instead want to indent that information that's being quoted. And I provide an example here showing normal text and then showing how it's indented from the rest of the text. And you don't have any quotes around these words. Instead, what you're going to do is you're just going to then, if you identify the author earlier as was done here, at the end of the sentence, just put the page number. And it differs also from traditional citations in that the period comes before this page number is cited rather than after, where in all other instances of citing information it always comes after. In terms of using references at the end of papers and having a references section, pages 198 to 224 of the APA manual go through a lot of different examples of different types of formatting for different references, whether it's articles, books, periodicals, sources on the web. You can find a great list of resources that show how information is formatted. And here's just some basic guidelines for that formatting of references. And I'm going to go through a couple of examples after this as well. But really what you want to make sure you do is indent all lines after the first line. So all the subsequent lines after the first line of a reference are indented. It's commonly referred to as hanging indentations. You also want to make sure in terms of formatting author names that you list the last names of the authors and then their initials, and you do that for all authors up to 7 total. If a work has more than 7 authors, you basically want to list the first 6 authors with last name, initials, and then what you're going to do is, in terms of the formatting, and I have it here so you can kind of follow along, comma, and then 3 periods, and then it ends with the final author name. So for example, if you had 8 authors or 9 authors, you list the first 6, and then comma, dot, 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 and then you end with that very last author's name. Each author name is in terms of reference listings. If you have multiple works in a references section, you want to make sure that those authors are alphabetized, and it should be by the last name of the first author of each work. So say you have 2 different sources, one by Johnson and one by Anderson. Make sure you list that one by Anderson first so that everything's alphabetized correctly. And then if you have articles of the same author, make sure you provide that information in chronological order. You want to list the publications, their titles in full and also italicized, as I've done here to show you as an example. And only capitalize if using titles of an article in a reference listing. You only want to capitalize the first letter of the first word of the title. And here's kind of an example. Say you had an article in this Academy of Management journal that was called The Presentation Formatting. You can see here kind of how the style of formatting that article title would look like in the references section. And then lastly, if using journal articles, you want to italicize the journal's volume number but not the issue number. The volume number comes first before the issue number, and that's italicized, and it follows right after the title of the publication, and you want to make sure you italicize both those items, but then the issue number is not italicized. It just goes back to regular formatting. And to kind of highlight that, here's some reference examples, and you can see here in terms of those hanging indentations after the first line, this is what it looks like in terms of the indentations. Also, too, one other thing you can see here in terms of italics, here's the publication title, and then also the volume number is italicized, whereas the issue number goes back to normal and is just put around parentheses. You can also see what I was talking about with those titles and how only the first word, letter of the first word is capitalized. And the next item of business is tense issues and kind of using tense. And really, when writing in an APA format, you want to try to be consistent in whatever tense you're writing in, whether it's past or present. And in general, you have some flexibility in terms of the style you're writing and trying to be consistent with that. What I'm going to talk about are just some basic guidelines depending on what section of a paper you're writing, just to kind of give you some helpful tips with that. And talking about tense, the APA manual, pages 65, 66, and 78 provide some really good descriptions of using tense in writing. But in terms of past tense, typically when you're talking about other individuals' work and research, immediately following that, you want to try to use past tense if possible. And some examples, say, again, author name Anderson, you would say maybe Anderson stated, Anderson found, Anderson discovered when discussing that information. This just kind of gives you an example of using past tense in the writing. Present tense sometimes is a little bit more scientific in that a lot of times is talking about the findings of a study. Especially this will happen if you get to a point where you're ever conducting your own research and talking about your own research and talking about findings of information. Since it's presented as ongoing truths, you typically want to use present tense to describe that information. And sometimes then what this leads to, and I know I talked about consistency earlier with using tenses, sometimes you might have a blend of tenses in one sentence when talking about ongoing truths of research. And here's kind of an example of that sentence where maybe you'd say something like, Patterson found that students love APA style. So you can kind of see where those tenses will blend in those instances when talking about ongoing truths of findings. In terms of introductions and conclusions, when introducing a paper, really what you kind of want to focus on when writing the introduction of a paper is really making sure it kind of sets the stage for what you're going to talk about throughout the rest of the paper. And because of that, you're probably going to want to use present or future tense when writing an introduction, because you're going to be, here's an example, this chapter will address the problem, or maybe you're going to say this essay will examine X, Y, and Z. That's kind of the formatting of tense you want to use, because that introduction is so crucial to kind of setting up what you're going to talk about in the rest of your paper. Conclusions, on the other hand, will typically be in past tense, because you're basically using that conclusion to summarize everything that was included in the paper at a high level and kind of wrapping up what was said. And you can kind of see here's an example of, like, for example, this chapter addressed X, Y, and Z again, and kind of showing the difference between the two when writing introductions and conclusions. Another important aspect of writing in APA formatting is working to reduce bias in the language you're writing. And in terms of, especially when talking about different populations and groups of individuals, make sure you use appropriate levels of specificity. And this is highlighted on page 70 of the APA manual. And only describe differences in terms of individuals when they're relevant. If it's really important to a particular study, if you're talking about the methodological background of the study and it's important to highlight who the populations were who were sampled, for example, then you can talk about some of the differences in individuals. But in general, you want to stay away from just blanketly referring to different individual differences and things. And here's some examples I provide, whether it's marital status, sexual orientation, or racial and ethnic identity. And again, to kind of piggyback off that, being sensitive to labels, you want to make sure you always refer to individual populations appropriately when discussing them, and not using words that are inappropriate or can indicate jargon when referring to different groups of people. Here's kind of an example I highlight where typically it's more appropriate to say children with autism instead of saying, like, the autistics or something like that. You kind of want to make sure that you're always aware of that in writing in a professional format. And also acknowledge participation using active words rather than passive words. And this is on page 73 of the APA manual that talks about this. You want to try to be concise in the writing and make sure that you're always writing in active phrases rather than using passive language. And you can see here basically kind of the difference I show. The students completed the survey as opposed to the survey was completed by the students. You can see the second sentence is wordier. It's not showing active language on the part of the writer, and it really has a lot of unnecessary verbiage. A lot more concise and clear with the first active statement that I explained with. So, getting to this point now that we've talked about some common areas of APA formatting, I just want to kind of highlight some ways to identify common APA formatting mistakes based on what we've discussed up to this point. And here's just some common mistakes again with citations, whether it's in-text citations, you want to make sure you spell out the word and. And if you're using parenthetical citations at the ends of sentences, those examples I showed with parentheses at the end of sentences, use the ampersand when having two authors. So that's the difference. You want to make sure when it's actually written in the text you spell out and then at the end of sentences you use this ampersand sign. So remember that when writing papers. Et al. For more than two authors, remember that the first citation in text, you'll still spell out all those authors, and then following that with subsequent citations, you would use et al. With direct quotations, remember not to overuse direct quotations. Please make sure you use them sparingly. And also lengthy quotations. 40 words or more need to be block quoted using that specific block formatting that I showed earlier. Levels of headings. If you're using subheadings, make sure that they follow those guidelines based on the different heading levels and that you're consistent with that and not mixing up the different formatting of headings. Numbers in sentences is another common mistake students make a lot of times with APA writing, and this is on pages 111 to 114 of the APA manual. If you have numbers less than 10, you want to spell out those numbers. If it's numbers of 10 or more, you can just write it like this, like for example 10. If you're beginning a sentence, you also want to spell out the numbers. So say you have a sentence that starts with 30 participants. You see you want to spell that out. You don't want to start a sentence with just writing the numbers like that. Definitely avoid doing that and make sure anytime you use numbers that start a sentence, whether it's general numbers or percentages, make sure you spell that information out. Also, common mistakes occur with that and who. If you're referring to inanimate objects, you use that, whereas people, you want to make sure you identify those individuals with a who rather than a that, because people are not inanimate objects. And I kind of give a couple of examples here. One being like, for example, describing a building which is an inanimate object. That building is big. If you're describing a woman, you'd want to say the woman who debated because it's a person. So that's kind of a basic difference there in terms of writing style. For additional resources for APA formatting, make sure you get the APA Manual 6th edition. This is the most current version of the APA Manual. You want to make sure there's some fundamental differences in terms of style and formatting between the previous editions and the 6th edition. So to make sure that you're consistent in using the most current information, make sure you get the 6th edition. There's also some really good tutorials on the web. If you go to apastyle.org, there's excellent information you could find, and they have a really good search menu there that if you just type in different items, you can find information that gives you guidance on how to format correctly. And there's also an online tutorial through apastyle.org as well that's really useful and helpful in terms of identifying common issues and mistakes in APA style. Another item on the web that's different from the APA manual but really gives good tutorials on APA style writing is this Purdue Online Writing Lab. It's abbreviated as OWL, and if you just Google Purdue Online Writing Lab or OWL, you'll be able to find this, and they give really excellent guidance on current APA formatting style. And really it's kind of an alternative if you don't go through the actual APA's website. This source also has a lot of good information, and my own students as an instructor, I often refer them to the OWL website to kind of see examples of different information pertaining to writing style with APA formatting. So that's going to conclude this presentation and workshop on APA formatting. I hope you found this of value and to be helpful in terms of getting a better basic understanding of APA writing. I'm going to stop the recording now and open up the floor for any questions. Thank you so much.
And I just want to give you a big thank you, James. This was such a wonderful presentation, and you covered all of the major areas in such an easy to follow way. So thank you very much.
Yeah, absolutely. And I hope the recording helped and everything. And,
yeah.
Absolutely.
Thanks so much.